Imagine for a moment you've completely lost your cool. Think back to maybe a time that you're kind of ashamed of, that you feel really bad, that you were not able to remain calm, that you could not be logical or reasonable or even kind. And bam, you were in it. You were angry. If there were a meter on the top of some sort of a cylinder, it would be in the red line, pushing towards the very edge, looking like it's going to break the needle. And what was it that caused you to go over the edge? But more important than the event or the trigger or the person or whatever it was, what was it that made it difficult to see what was happening in the moment, to catch yourself before you went out of your mind? And when I say out of your mind, what I mean is when we go out of our mind, from a neuroscience perspective, it means we're out of our logical reasoning mind where we can think things through, where we can observe our own behaviors and our actions and decide, how do I want to respond? But when you think about this for a moment, that's kind of slow, isn't it? How do I want to respond to this situation? We are built to more generally react as a form of response really quickly. And the worst case scenario, it's fight, flight, or freeze in response to some sort of significant stress or threat. Be that emotional, be that a physical threat. But also if we feel attacked verbally, if we feel hard done by, we might immediately react, going into some kind of an emotional or feeling state that would not be our preference. I'm Darren Steele, and this is Leading from Human-Heartedness. And the topic of today's episode discussion is the space between emotion and reason and how equanimity transforms leadership. Now, I want to tell you a story today, but first I want to provide a bit of an explanation about equanimity. So here's how I would explain it. Equanimity is the space between the raw emotions and logic. So the raw emotional reactive state and our prefrontal cortex activity, our ability to think, reason, see into the future, set goals, envision, contemplate. So equanimity is where and when, because it's an in the moment thing, it's a present state of mind thing. Equanimity is where and when we access our humaneness, where we can observe without judgment or prejudice what's happening outside of us and what we are feeling inside in response or in reaction to events. Now, just for fun, if I look at the dictionary definition, it's really simplistic. Equanimity is mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. You may have more likely heard of equanimity from Buddhism, and that is referred to as a state of mental balance and even mindedness. Okay, so it's kind of a balance. But what is most important with equanimity for me is that we're in the present moment, that we can catch a breath, that we can observe and find neutrality in the moment to determine how it is we want to respond. But what you may have figured out from what I'm saying so far is equanimity, logical reasoning, being reasonable, is slow. And this is how our prefrontal cortex, the front of our brain, works. It's the slowest part of our brain because being rational, reasoning things out, requires taking in information, things that we know, things that we're observing in the moment, pulling up perhaps even past experiences to determine, okay, How is it I want to respond in this moment in a fair and equitable and just and kind way that demonstrates my understanding, my patience, and my calmness? Versus somebody says something really horrible to you, or they attack you on social media, and immediately you're off the handle, wanting to shout back at them, wanting to write something horrible. You see the difference. So in between those 2 points is this ability to see what's going on, to catch yourself before you go off the cliff, before you go into the red line of reaction and triggering what's more often referred to as the mammalian or the animal part of our brain, where we're seeking comfort and safety, social acceptance, and we will push back when we feel we don't have those secure feelings and emotions. So I mentioned I was going to tell you a story. I think this was back in about 2005 or 2006. I'll have to look. I went on a Vipassana meditation for 10 days. I was living in Toronto, Ontario. It was about an hour plus outside of Toronto in the country. It was beautiful, many-acre site. And it was a silent meditation, other than we sat 3 times as a group of about 70 people. There were instructions given, and then you sat. It was the 3 or the 4 times in the day for an hour as a group in complete silence. You were not allowed to speak. You had your own private room, and the last meditation of the day, there was a Dharma lecture that was recorded that gave you something to think about and ponder as you were doing your meditation. Without getting into all the details, the Vipassana meditation is kind of like a body scan, where you start from the top of your head and work your way down. It's a very slow process where you're trying to focus on the sensations on the body. You're trying to notice your physical reactions, responses to the environment around you, from sound to feeling. You're also required to sit still in meditation. So the approximate time in the whole day was 10 to 11 hours of meditation. So I was struggling. I think this was day 5 or day 6, and sitting in meditation, maybe 20 minutes in, I'd have to shift my body a little bit, or maybe I was sitting on my shins, or I had a little bit of a meditation stool, and I would very slowly and quietly try to shift. But there were a couple of days, and this particular day, my back was on fire. It was all I could do in that hour to be mindful of my body scan, to be mindful of my in-breath and noticing the breath and the inhalation and the exhalation, and feeling the hairs in my nose, and just reminding myself that everything is a sensation that arises and passes. Sometimes a sensation lasts for a very long time. Sometimes a sensation is very intense. Sometimes a sensation is like an itch. But the thing is to notice the itch and not to be reactive and to lift my hand to it and to scratch the itch that might be on the side of my face, or to scratch the inside of my nose, because focusing on my breathing is also making me aware. You see where I'm going with this? When everything else is pulled out of your environment as a distraction, and you realize how many distractions are of your own accord, are of your own making, it's overwhelming and it's humbling at the same time to see how we create this perception of what keeps our attention, instead of perhaps focusing on a state of mind that is equanimous, that is calm, that is open, that is curious, that is playful, that is understanding. Optimal states of human-heartedness. Would you say no? So pain, like it was like fire. It was like someone was scraping down my back because I was having trouble staying upright, and somebody had a cold. There were 70 people in this room. The room was quiet except for the coughing, and quiet except for a little bit of the air conditioning unit that was just relatively quietly blowing air into the room. Every time she coughed, it was like this vibrational frequency resonating through my body. Have you ever had that experience? For me, it's usually with music, where one of your all-time favorite songs, and you haven't heard it in a while, and it comes on, and the hairs raise on your body, and you get tingles. You almost feel cold and prickly, but it's wonderful. The same feeling, but not a great feeling, because the same sensation, but rather one of aggravation. In my mind, I'm like, what the fuck? Will you stop coughing, you goddamn fucking... And then suddenly, after about 5 minutes of this, I was reminded of the practice of equanimity, of also trying to find kindness. It just blew my mind. Suddenly, I thought to myself, this woman is here and has every right to be here for the 10 days as much as I do. She is unfortunately suffering from something that is outside of her control. It is clear to me when I pay attention, when I observe without prejudice, that she is trying not to cough. But you know how when you try not to cough, it makes you cough even more? I heard her earlier unwrap a cough lozenge and put that in her mouth. But I know what it's like because I'm someone that coughs all the time. And when I get nervous, I have this nervous cough. And people think, are you sick? No, it's just my reactivity. And then I have to pull myself back and pay attention. But you see where I'm going with this. In noticing, I thought to myself, she's not doing this on purpose. All I can be is kind in my mind and in my thoughts towards her, that I have experienced the same thing and felt perhaps embarrassed or guilty that I was disrupting an environment by coughing. And I started to wish her loving kindness in my mind, because loving kindness was also one of the Buddhist practices that was being taught in this meditation. And in bringing down my anger, centering myself, I returned to calmness. And I paid attention to the sound. And when she coughed, it was like I anticipated the cough, and the sound waves moved more slowly, but then passed through me as if I were just standing in a lake on the most gentle day with no wind, and it was part of my surroundings. It no longer affected me. And then I realized that my back wasn't hurting anymore. There was some residual physical discomfort from the tension I had created as a response to what I was feeling. That would clearly be helped if I did some stretching afterwards to reduce the tension, but the overall reaction to my environment, to my mind, to what I had been thinking, to my aggravating thoughts, to my frustration, made manifest in my body as a physical shooting red-hot pain up and down my spine, was gone. And it was an epiphany moment for me. It was the most important lesson I've had in my life about equanimity. This space between the raw emotions, and emotions are manifest physically. We feel our emotions on our body. That space between the emotional reaction or response and logic. How am I thinking about my perceptions in this moment now? I don't want to speak too much longer after this story because I hope that that explains an awful lot about equanimity and how we can get ourselves lost in this state of anger and frustration. And then in that physical state, imagine if I were at a protest feeling that kind of discomfort, maybe I would have done something horrible. Maybe I could have gotten into a fist fight with someone. But that awareness has reminded me that I can put into practice ways of paying attention, ways of being more proactive in my attention, my focus on my state of mind and my state of being, things I have to do day to day, my regular fitness and exercise, perhaps meditation, journaling, catching myself when I start going a little bit off the handle, catching myself when I'm distracted and I'm not centered, bringing myself back to that point of center and balance, which was that mindfulness that Buddhism is talking about. Because when we are equanimous, we are able to observe our perceptions of events. And when we can observe our perceptions, think of that as the data versus the drama. How we react is the drama. How we respond is when we can observe what this means to us and make some decisions and choices about how we want to feel about it, because how we feel about it is in part an intellectual and a physical combination of things that is going to also trigger some core emotions in us. I think equanimity goes a long way towards understanding the intellectual and emotionally supportive connection and comprehension and communion, the seeing yourself in the other person with others and without prejudice, simply without prejudging the person or the situation. This gives us more freedom. If you are always reactive, you're going to be in a state of resistance, and people are going to push back against you or put up more walls. So equanimity is a kind of free state of mind. It allows you to live without the oppression or suppression of mental reactivity, frustration, anxiety. It allows you, equanimity allows you to live fully, authentically expressing who you best are in the moment. I want to read a couple things that I've written to wrap this all up. Equanimity is about finding peacefulness at the center of discord. Equanimity is about finding peacefulness at the center of discord. If you're a leader, a change maker, a social entrepreneur, it's so easy to start your day worrying about how you're going to fix things. Now, the most effective, ethical, powerful and humane transformation for society will only happen through mindful, reasonable thinking and contemplation that is firmly rooted in calmness, composure, fairness, and impartiality. So when things go wrong, it is very difficult, it is very challenging. It sometimes feels impossible to not want to respond in the form of an attack. It is very difficult to respond from a place of loving kindness and acceptance for the other side, for the other people, for the other political party. To see them as human beings, especially when they're saying the enemy should be ripped apart and fed to the pigs, something I read in the news this morning. The challenge with equanimity is maintaining emotional integrity, being able to offer alternative solutions that improve the situation for those closest to you, that improve the situation for humanity, that improve the situation for fairness and for equity. How in your life can you practice more equanimity? What can you do on a regular basis that will remind you to be equanimous, that will physically, emotionally, psychologically make you better prepared to see yourself ramping up to that point, like that gauge going towards the red line, that you're teetering on the edge of that cliff of going so far over that you can't pull yourself back. I'd love to hear what your practices are that help you maintain equanimity, and if you've had any transformative experiences like what I had in my 10-day meditation experience. Thank you for listening and watching. I'm Darren Steele with Leading from Human-Heartedness.